Hello, this is turn 2 in our playthrough of the game Supply Lines of the American Revolution, the Northern Theater by Hollandspiele Games. In my previous video we did turn 1 and now we're going to do turn 2. Let's jump right to the sequence of play. First thing you always want to do at the start of every turn is just verify that it is not a winter turn, and I'm waving the cursor here over the game turn record track. It is indeed not a winter turn. A turn 3, the next turn will be a winter turn. So more on winter turns in the next video. Next up, if there's a crown reinforcement track counter in Nova Scotia, and there is, then we'll convert this marker to the permitted number of reinforcements guaranteed by the counter. We took it from here, so the crown player is entitled to six reinforcements, so I'll generate those. Remember that this counter, I'm just going to put it down here, is not a unit, whereas these markers with the soldier on them are. And so we will put those 6 units in Nova Scotia. Then each player, crown first, can move supplies along an overland supply line. The crown player does not have any overland supply lines, so they're not eligible to move anything. The Patriot player or Continental player does have a supply line stretching from Stonington to Cambridge. Is there any reason to move any supplies along this line? And the main reason you would do that is for defensive purposes, because a given side might not get the first impulse, and so with that in mind, you may want to redistribute supplies along a supply line so that if you indeed don't get the first impulse and get attacked in the first impulse, then you have probably war supplies positioned in the way you want them to deal with any attacks by the facing player. I might put if I thought that there was any chance that the army in Boston would attack this point, I'd probably put some more supplies there so that, again, if they were attacked, then they would be able to purchase battle die. Remember that the defender, the non-phasing player, is not allowed to move supplies along the supply line during the phasing player's phase. So this is, as it were, my opportunity as the Patriot player to move supplies along here for defensive purposes. But I think it would be really poor strategy for the army in Boston to attack this point. Because if I did, one reason being that it would, depending on how many troops I moved over, if I moved them all to the point, then that would just give the Patriot side this victory city, Boston. And the other reason is that then when the inevitable attack from Cambridge into the point comes, the Patriot player would be able to buy war supplies at a cheaper rate, because when you attack a point, you get 1 battle die per war supply spent, whereas remember, if you're attacking into a city, you get it's a little more complicated than this for the British. We'll get to that when it comes, but the first battle die always costs, when you're attacking into a city, the first battle die always costs 2 war supplies. So I don't think there's a reasonable chance that the crown player will attack this point, so I'm not going to bother moving supplies. I might as well just move 1 war supply from Stonington. I'm going to move Providence into Cambridge, just so I get the maximum number of supplies where my main army is in Cambridge. Next step, the crown player can move supplies, not armies, just supplies, from exactly 1 crown occupied port to exactly 1 crown occupied port, or the at-sea box. I would dearly love to. Oh, well, yeah. I would dearly love to get supplies into Boston. Um, well, I should actually pause. I missed a step. I forgot to mention that after we did the reinforcements, the next step should have been to generate supplies. But I did that before I started the video, just because it's tedious to watch me place all the cubes. So I already did that, um, uh, including generating one supply in Nova Scotia. And what entitled me to do that was the fact that, that this reinforcement counter was in Nova Scotia, and that entitles me on the Crown reinforcement track. That entitles me to generate one supply in Nova Scotia when I generate supplies. So I would like to get supplies into Boston, at least in the abstract. But the thing, well, I will discuss it in more detail shortly. But uh, the army in Boston is basically facing total defeat given the size of the army in Cambridge. Uh, and, it, and remember, the army in Cambridge got as big as it did because it got 4 units of reinforcements during the whatever it's called, the Patriot reinforcement phase at the end of the first turn. That the army in Boston is going to be looking to evacuate at its earliest opportunity, and so for that reason, I don't have any. And when you do, which is a sea transport, and when you sea transport an army, it can't carry any supplies with it, so there wouldn't be any point for me to, as a Patriot player, to put supplies into Boston. So I am not going to move. I'm not going to place my supply this in Nova Scotia anywhere. I'm going to save it for when the army that evacuates out of Boston lands, because I'm going to want to get as much supplies to it as I can as quickly as possible. So I'm just going to leave that supply in Nova Scotia. And remember, Quebec has kind of a special status as a port city. The Crown player is not allowed to move supplies out of Quebec via sea transport. It can move supplies along a supply chain on the map, but not via the ocean. So that's not an option for me. So I, as the Crown player, am not going to move any supplies along a sea route. And then finally, the last step is that the Crown player can move the next eligible reinforcement track counter into Nova Scotia. Do I want to do that now? One thing to keep in mind is that if I do that, that will advance the support marker, the Patriot support track marker, which I'm moving my cursor around over on the left side of the map. It will move it 1 to the right and just 1 step away uh, from the Declaration of Independence area on the track, which will which will give the Patriot an additional city of reinforcements every time they muster reinforcements, which I would dearly like to avoid. So, but my goal in this turn is not to give, it's certainly not entirely in my control, and I'll talk more about that in a second. My goal is not to give the Patriots any opportunities, me as the Crown player, any opportunities to attack me this turn. It's really only opportunity. Its only opportunity to do so is in Boston, and I'm going to evacuate Boston as soon as I possibly can. So, with that in mind, I am going to move my second reinforcement marker into Nova Scotia. All right, that's the end of the supply phase. Now we do initiative. And so that's where each side rolls one d6, and the side who rolls highest gets the first initiative, and the value of the highest dice or die sets the marker on the past track. So we'll roll 2d6 with the Americans on the left and the British on the right. And the Americans rolled higher. Okay, so we have kind of a quandary for the video playthrough. Since the Americans rolled higher, they would be eligible on their first impulse to attack Boston. And they've got 10 units and a leader, so that's like a strength level of 11 versus a strength level of 5 in Boston. And the British could buy one battle die to try to reduce that strength level. Um, the Americans could buy two battle die because they've got 4 war supplies in Cambridge. They have enough green cubes. It will take 3 green cubes to activate all 10 units. 1 green cube activates up to 4 units. And then, if you remember from the battle sequence video, first of all, the Americans are guaranteed to win the battle, because remember, the winner, the victor of the battle, is the side that has the most units plus leaders in their army at the end. So that's, of course, guaranteed to be the Americans. And then I'm summarizing a bit, but when the British player will eventually have to check for morale, and what they have to do is they have to roll at or higher than the difference between the winning the strength level of the winning side and the losing side. So that would be 11 minus 5, right, equals 6. So they would have to. So they would only have a 1 in 6. This army in Boston only has. It's a little more complicated than this, but basically this army has a 1 out of 6 chance of even surviving. And if that were to happen, then that would advance the support marker 1, 2, 3 over, and the British player's only option at that point would be to play their triumvirate of reputation marker. And essentially what that does is I would be required, as a British player, I would be required to remove my leader from Quebec. I would get 3 leaders in Nova Scotia, and I would be expected to, and my victory conditions would be made more difficult by, I would have to take an additional victory city to whatever my current requirement is. So right now my current requirement is 4 because I've taken 2 reinforcement track markers and put them in Nova Scotia. So my current requirement is 4, so this would make it 5. And that would be, it might be feasible, but it would be tough. I'm just deciding, just for like video playthrough purposes, what I want to do here. I mean, my goal was, in creating a playthrough video, was to create something that have it be a genuine playthrough, but also have it be somewhat representative of a typical experience. And it's actually very rare for Cambridge to have this many units in it, American units in it, in turn 2. I think, I hate to do this, but I think for like playthrough purposes, I think it would just be a more useful set of videos, because I think, again, it would be somewhat more, it would represent more typical play if I were to give the British the first impulse here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave the pass marker where it is, but I'm going to give the British the first impulse. And maybe after I finish this, then maybe I'll do a second playthrough where I go back to this point in the game and play it the way I rolled it. That is, so then we could see an example of gameplay where the triumvirate counter is played, and we can see how that plays out. This has only happened like, I think I've only pulled this like once in all of my solo plays of this game, so it doesn't. The, the situation we're in now is pretty atypical. So I'm going to give the British the first impulse, and then another thing this will do is just allow you to see right away how a sea movement works. So for the first impulse, the British will evacuate their army from Boston, and the way you do sea movement is it doesn't require any the use of any supply cubes, and the army cannot take any supply with it when it does a sea movement. So the way sea movement works is the first movement is from the port city in question, or or the Fort Phoenix here is also a port, and you move it to the at-sea box, and that's the move. I mean, that's the impulse. And then in a subsequent impulse, I can place all or some of these units on any empty port space or on a friendly occupied port space. So I could place them in Quebec, I could place them in Falmouth. Boston remains open. It's not going to be open, but if it does, then I could put them there. But I couldn't put them in New York, say. There are no amphibious assaults in this game. So that's my impulse as the British player. Now it's the Americans' impulse. What do I want to do besides, of course, definitely want to put an army into Boston. And for purposes of the upcoming winter phase turn, I'll explain more about how the winter phase works, or how a winter turn works, and which includes um, essentially one of the things that happens in a winter turn is that a lot of the Patriot armies go home, so they're removed from the board. And just based on how that works, I'm going to, as the Patriot player, going to spend one green cube here. Oh, there's a 2 right here. And I'm going to move 2. So, well, do I really need... Actually, I don't think Yeah, I'm going to move 2 in there. So move 2 armies into Boston. So that's my Patriot impulse. Now it's the British impulse. Now, I probably want to not land this army right away, because I don't want to give the Patriot player a chance. I mean, right now there's 1, 2, 3, 4 passes that need to be made before the turn ends. And I don't want to give the Patriot player a chance to redistribute their forces in light of where I land. So what I'm going to... So one thing I want to think about, is there anything else I want to accomplish before as a British player, before I start landing troops? I've been holding off on starting my... Well, one thing I can do is I have to think about where I want to put my reinforcements. I think I'm going to want to put them up here. And the reason why is there's currently 6 units between Quebec and Montreal, and I want to build a supply line to get an army into like the breadbasket here. But if you just count the number of units required to maintain the supply line, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So right now I only have enough units in this area just to get a supply line with 1 unit into Fort Ticonderoga. Um, Now case um, now I do have more reinforcements coming. Essentially, I only want to do the supply. I want to move all the troops I'm going to move all at once. I don't want to, although maybe it ultimately doesn't matter. Um, I kind of forget from my previous playthroughs whether there's an advantage to like. I mean, one approach is to go ahead and just build the supply line now, and then any reinforcements I put in Quebec, move those later. Another approach is just to get all the forces you're going to have in Quebec all at once and do it all at once. Um, I guess it costs basically the same number of, well, potentially the same number of cubes, although you might have some efficiencies by doing it all at once, depending on the exact number of units you're moving. I'm going to put my I'm going to keep 1 unit in Nova Scotia, and the reason I'm doing that is because remember that the way the movement of supplies work from one port to another during the supply phase, you can only move supplies from one crown-occupied port city to another one, and so to be able to move supplies out of Nova Scotia, I need to keep at least 1 unit in Nova Scotia. So I'll keep 1 unit in Nova Scotia, and let's see, let me think here. See, if I put 5, right now I've got 4. If I put 5 here, then I'm moving. Oh, but then I'll be moving 8. Yeah, so I want to put 5 here because I need to keep 1 in Quebec. So yeah, so this works good. Okay. Oops. Oh, all right, I need to unstick these somehow. What's going on here? There we go. Just so I remember where my leader is. All right. So now it's the Patriot players phase. Now there's really not a lot. I mean, obviously the Patriot player is not in a position right now to attack the British at all. So it's a question of what else do they want to accomplish. Um, One thing they can be thinking about is trying to limit the locations where the British Army could land. Like right now, for instance, the British Army would be eligible to land in Falmouth. Now, I don't know if that would be a great move because if I land the British, if the British player lands their army in Falmouth, then there's always going to be an impulse, at least one impulse, where the Patriot player can move an army from Cambridge into this point and prevent Falmouth from getting any supplies. So the British army would essentially be back in the position of where it was in Boston. So I don't think that would be a good ploy. Um, a more interesting one more plausible one might be Fort Phoenix, although the British army can't generate supplies in a port. Um, But what's going to happen is when the winter phase comes, um, and the Patriot Army goes home, one thing that's going to happen is the armies, uh, any armies in Providence and Stonington will go home unless there's a leader in the city in question. Um, and so a British army in Fort Phoenix might make sense because then there's a good chance that one of these two cities will be open and available for the British player to move into, provided they can get supplies, of course. Um, New York would be a huge prize for the British, but if they put their army here, they don't have any chance of getting supplies, and they would not be blocking the army in New York from getting supplies because of this point here, where I'm waving my cursor. Um, so the army in New York would be continually generating supplies and being able to whack the army on Long Island here and moving their uh, moving their support tracker. So really, and then the only remaining port city is the point down here, which is looking like the most plausible place for the British to land. So with that in mind, now I would not. So I, as the American player, would like to get some forces south, but I always want to keep at least one strength point in New York so that to prevent the British player from landing an army via the sea in New York. So there's really not a lot I can do right now, but maybe what I want to do is at least get my army to get an army with one unit here just to kind of start that process. I think that is what I'm going to do. So I will spend one food cube to activate here. Now, well, maybe that's not the right thing to do, because once I do that, then that does make landing an army in Long Island more tempting, because then the Patriot player cannot be attacking me. Well, it can. Well, it can, and there is this action called skirmish that the raid, is it called? It's something in my solo playthroughs I probably haven't taken enough advantage of. Let me just quick find the rules for a skirmish. A Patriot army consisting of no more than 2 units, with or without a leader, may be activated to skirmish if they're adjacent to an enemy army that occupies a point. So that would Long Island would be a point. An army activated to skirmish is moved to the enemy-occupied port and initiates a special kind of one-sided battle called a skirmish. The army expends 1 food supply for this activation. If the army does not have a leader, it must only consist of 1 or 2 units. If the army does have a leader, then the leader can activate 1 or 2 of those units to skirmish. At the completion of the skirmish, unlike a standard battle, the Patriot units are returned to their original location. And in the case of a skirmish activation by a leader, they rejoin their original army. But it doesn't say. Oh, and then as far as like the actual skirmish process, a skirmish battle, defender can't refuse battle and does not earn any dice. The attacking Patriot player expends war supplies to earn dice on a 1-for-1 basis. The attacker rolls his die, eliminating a crown unit for each result of a 1 or 2. The attacker then moves back to the original area, regardless of what happened in the area that the skirmish was conducted against. But it doesn't say it here, but I know that A skirmish result like that does not advance the Patriot support tracker, unlike an attack by a Patriot army with a leader. So essentially, if I did land, if I as a British player put my army in Long Island, then the Patriot player would have the opportunity to skirmish me. Not very attractive. But once I get supplies in there, then I would have and I could always move back. Another thing I could do is I could put a strength marker in Long Island just to forestall any attempt. But the thing is that strength marker would disappear during when all the Patriot armies go home in the next turn. It's hard to know what the best play here is as the Patriot side. I'm going to just do it like this. What I'm really hoping for is reinforcements in New York next turn, so that maybe I can get get my army into Morristown to counter what's probably going to happen, to start to counter probably what's going to happen, which is the British player landing south of Fort Mifflin here. So I'm going to do it like this. Now it's the British phase. There's really nothing for me to do as the British. Well, now, okay, question. Do I want to start moving? Yeah, I think this is a good opportunity for me to start. I could wait even to the next turn, because probably I'd like to get even more forces into Quebec. But, well, does it matter? But even having an army of 4 down here could make a big difference. Yeah, I'm going to start building my supply line here. So I'm going to move 8 units. So I'm going to spend 2 green cubes. And I'm going to leave 1 in Quebec. Move 8 here. And that's my turn, or my impulse. Now, American impulse. Really the only other thing that the American player, well, let's see. Does the American player want to, like, put a strength point into Fort Phoenix? I don't think so. It's just landing a British army in Fort Phoenix has just never seemed that appealing to me. Playing the British side, just because early in the game like this, just because then I've got my British army here, kind of flanked, as it were, by both Patriot armies. That just does not seem. It's hard for me to see how this army is going to have a good chance of breaking out in those circumstances. I think as the Patriot player, I just want to pass, so I'm going to pass. Well, the other option is to try to possibly start moving an army here to try to interrupt the British player's ability to get a supply line into Fort Ticonderoga and get an army here. One consideration you always want to be thinking about as the American player is essentially this army here is going to lose, as it stands, will lose 4 units during the in the upcoming winter turn. So it's going to lose 4 anyways. So with that in mind, I might as well use them. But the thing is, as I move units out of Cambridge, that's making Falmouth look like more and more of a target for the British to land in. I always want to make sure I can get a supply into this point. I mean, a unit into this point as the American player, so that if a British army does land in Falmouth, they can't generate supplies right away. But I can still. Thing is, just any units that are in any of these spaces at the end of the winter phase will evaporate. So is it really worth it? Well, I'm going to lose them anyways, though. So you always have to. It will cost supply. Right now, I've got a huge amount of supply in Albany, so if I can build a supply line here, I don't know if this is the best play, but I'm going to do it. So I'm not going to move my leader. I want to keep the leader in Cambridge, I think. Well, it's a good question. I mean, if I'm making it so unappealing for the British player to land over here, then maybe I don't need a leader over here at this point. You know what? I'm going to play. Yeah, I'm going to play aggressively as the. Let's see. Sorry, I'm thinking. Just how aggressive I want to play this. I'm going to play aggressive. So actually, what I'm going to do is, I don't know if this is good. Boy, is this good strategy. If I leave 2 here, then in the upcoming winter phase, they will evaporate because I won't have a leader here, and I'm in Cambridge, and this is not a victory city. I want to leave 2 behind. I've got time to react though. You know what? I keep changing my mind. I apologize. Um, 4 turns to get. Yeah, 4 turns to get to Fort Ticonderoga. No, I'm gonna go for it. I could be making a big mistake as the Patriot player here. You're probably just saying, for God's sakes, do something. So I'm going to leave 2 in Cambridge because I want to make sure I can put 1 either in Falmouth or at least this point. So I'm going to move 6. Well, but I'm going to lose them though. Oh, that's annoying. I can always move them back though. I don't think I've ever played it this way before, but we're going to see what happens. So I'm going to move an army of 6 into here, leaving 2 in K. Okay, and I need to spend another green food cube to do that. All right, that's my American phase. Now the British phase. Uh, I'm gonna. Now what do I want to do? Do I want to push towards an end so I can land with a flourish right at the very end, or just keep? Let's keep building. So I've got 8 here. So I'm gonna. I'm gonna move 2 green cubes along my supply line to here and then spend them. I'm really activating 7 and leaving 1 behind. So let's, oh, I didn't do this right. Oh, well. There's probably a more efficient way of doing this. Oh, well, I didn't need that, I guess. Sorry. Okay, so these 3 are going to Montreal, leaving 1 behind in this point. And that's my British phase. Now American phase. I will pull two supplies from Providence, moving them along the supply line to my army in the point, and then spend them. I'm really activating 5 units, which does require 2 green cubes. From a wargaming perspective in general, this just feels better because I'm conquering territory, even though I'm really not accomplishing not necessarily accomplishing anything as the Patriot player because my support track marker is not moving. So, um, but we'll see how this plays out. Let's see. Now it's the British phase. So I think they'll just keep. Let's see. They're not going to be able to march all the way to Ticonderoga this turn because they don't have enough supply. But I think they will march 1 more. So they're going to move. Going to spend 2. To activate 8, leaving 1 behind. And they will move into Fort Jean. Now it's the American turn. I think maybe I have blundered at the American player, because if I land an army in Boston, in Falmouth, well, it's going to be a bit of a delay. He's not going to have supply to attack, though, is the thing. Maybe I'm trying to do this too early in the morning. See, as the American player, I'm just gonna Do I want to go into Fort Ticonderoga and grab those supplies? Yeah, I'm going to do it. I don't think I need my... Let's see, they're going to have a... When they arrive at Fort Crown Point, they're going to have an army of 7. I would have an army... Oh. I think I'm going to activate... Spend 1 green cube. I can spend it from... I can move it from Albany. Spend it. Move 1 unit into Fort Ticonderoga and just steal those supplies, those valuable war supplies out of Fort Ticonderoga and move them somewhere safe in my supply line. I'll move them to Providence for now. British player. Ooh. British player. Can move 1 more. Am I giving... I'm not really giving the Americans any opportunity to move their support marker by... If I move into Fort Crown, I'm thinking that could... The Patriot Army does have enough supply to move additional forces into Fort Ticonderoga and attack. But they wouldn't be able to win the battle and move the support marker. I'm going to just keep playing aggressive here, spend my last 2 cubes. Montreal, thereby activating 6 units. Wait, what am I doing here? I'm going to backstep this. Get this to where it was. Okay. So I've got 8. Oh, yeah, I don't need to make change. So what am I thinking? So because I've got a 1 counter in there already. So I'm going to... So I spent my 2 green cubes to activate 7. Put them in Crown Point. But I don't have any. There are no green cubes left in my supply chain. So now thinking as the American player, this unit here currently is not in any danger, but it will be in danger the next time the British have supplies if I just leave it there. So I'm going to spend... I, as the American player, is going to spend another green cube and withdraw it back to here. All right. British phase. British impulse. Oh, they're going to pass. Americans. I do just fear just being a little bit more exposed over here as the Americans. I mean, the British could land here. There's 1 green cube here. With this here, they can generate... Oh, yeah, they can generate a... They'll generate a total of... No, of 2 supplies. They'll generate 2 supplies next supply phase, so they can generate a green and a yellow cube. so that if if the British Army lands here this turn, they can move supplies in and then attack. Um, let's see. I as the phasing American player, I'm going to play things really safe here. I'm going to spend a green cube. And moving into Falmouth just to preclude any landing in Falmouth by the British Army. So British player, the British player maybe missed an opportunity there on their previous impulse to do that. Yeah. But at this point, I don't think there's anything really left for the British player to do, so they'll pass. Well, they can land. I don't think they. Well, it probably doesn't make any difference at this point because there's so little for that the Patriot player can do. So where do the British want to land? Well, yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'll just pass as the British player. Americans will pass. And then, now I do have the option as a British player of just leaving my armies in the C box. But then when I do land them on the, but then if I don't land them now, then, well, the advantage of landing them now is then at the start of the next turn during the supply phase, I'll be able to move supplies from Nova Scotia into that port city. So I think that, so I don't see any compelling reason for me as a British player to not land my forces this turn. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Land them down here. This godforsaken piece of real estate, whatever that is down there. And then, so now it's the American phase, and they'll pass. So the impulse phase is over. So to wrap things up, the turn end phase, let's see, crown player checks for victory. Both sides really check for victory. Remove all dug in markers. Haven't talked much about digging in. That would have not saved the army in Boston. I mean, it's still, what digging in basically does is it forestalls the loss of one unit during combat, but that would have not saved, as it were, the army in Boston. It still would have faced extreme odds towards surviving an attack from Cambridge. But if either side had placed any dug-in markers, they'd be returned now. In a winter turn, the Continental Army would disband. I alluded to that before. And now we muster Patriot reinforcements. So let me just put these three to the side. We only replace, completely reconstitute the reinforcement marker pool during a winter turn. So we're just going to draw 3 more at random. And again, we're drawing 3 because because of the location of the Patriot support marker. Oh, and I neglected to do something. When I asked for reinforcements, for the second time, I should have moved my support marker 1 to the right. That's bad of me forgetting that. So I'm glad I remembered that. So, but we're still in the 3 area. The 3 Patriot reinforcements area on the Patriot support track. So we drew 3 new cubes. Oh, look at that. The Patriot player, this is not overall what they were looking for. They wanted to get some units down here, get some reinforcements down here. So 2 go into New York. two go into Providence and two go into Stonington. Just put these here. All right. So yeah, that was not. I mean, the Patriots are almost always happy to get reinforcements in New York. But what they really would like them is, well, Baltimore would have been ideal, because that would have made it a lot more difficult. I mean, right now the British Army in this point can't generate any supplies on its own. It needs to get into Boston, while either occupying this point space or at least having it empty before it can start generating supplies on its own, as it were. Um, so the uh, but even with but even not getting reinforcements in Baltimore, it really would be helpful to get them into Philadelphia and York, as well. Because during the winter phase, since Philadelphia and York are victory cities, uh, those two victory cities can keep up to two units in either of those cities, would survive the disbandment of the Continental Army. The Patriot player would be allowed to keep two strength points in both Philadelphia and York if there were, it, up to two. So so that would be really help. That would have been really helpful for the Patriot player going into turn 4, looking ahead. So not a good. So not a good draw for the reinforcement draw for the Patriots this turn. So we're at the end of turn 2, and if you stuck it out to the end, I hope you enjoyed all my uh, pondering and thinking about alternatives. These are the kinds of things I think about whenever I play this game, and in my experience, it's impossible to play this game without without just wondering, wow, did I play that right? Should I have done something different? Um, right now, the Patriot Army is really spread out all over the board, and and I'm going to probably have to do a fair amount of reorganizing as the Patriot player for the upcoming winter turn and the upcoming Patriot disbandment, because of course as a Patriot player you want to go through disbandment with as many units, but trying to keep as many units as you can on the board. So that often involves a lot of like reshuffling, and then because of that reshuffling, it can give the British player some opportunities to make headway. Anyways, so thank you for watching, and the next video I do will be turn 3.